Okay, following on from what we've just been looking at, which was how you can blend colours together and how hue can represent tone, I'm going to use abstract colour again to create this eye using watercolour. So let's think first about the characteristics of the material. So watercolour is essentially a water-based paint. So that means that it only works with water. But the tricky part of this is finding a balance between pigment, which is the colour, and water. And what people tend to do a little bit too much is dilute the colour. And that often happens because there's a really common misconception that you should start with the lightest areas and then build to the darkest. But it's actually really good if you start with the darkest areas and then build to the lightest, because you get this real sense of layering and depth within your image, which is often what we're looking for when we're using watercolour, but it's also often what's lacking. So to get that depth and that richness of colour, we're going to start with the darkest colours first. Sorry, notice I'm saying darkest colours, so I'm going to leave black out of the situation. And I will use that last, because if I accidentally pick some black up when I'm using water, that will make the rest of my image quite dirty. So I'm going to start with some really dark blue. And I'm going to put just a little bit of water on there to activate it, so that I'm mainly using pigment and my colour won't be too light. And you can check that always on the side of your page, and I can see that that's quite dark. And I'm just going to go in here, because this is some of my darkest tones. And you can see I'm using long, steady strokes. And then I'm going to add a little bit more water, because that'll dry really quickly. And you can see if it's wet or not because it's got a shiny top. And then I'm going to go around here. And as I'm doing all of the different marks, the ones that I've just been working on will actually start drying, which is what we want, because then we can go over that and we can work different colours into that without it looking watered down and lacking in tonal depth. I'm just going to thicken that up. Then what I want to do is put this dark blue everywhere that it would possibly be in the image. So I'm just going to quickly do that. And obviously you might want to think about the speed of your marks. Don't think that you can replicate my speed. I've had a lot of practice when you're doing it. Take it nice and slow and steady. Remember, same as with when we were shading using the pencil, you can move your paper around as you need to, so that you can get your hand really comfortable to make the kinds of marks that you want to make. And I've got some dark patches in like this. And what I'm not worrying about too much is colour. I'm always just worrying about tone, because I always want that sense of 3D form. If we were doing something hyper-realistic, obviously we would worry about colour and we'd want to be really precise in our mixing techniques, but here I'm using colour in an abstract manner. And I'm just putting that base down like this. Once I've got that, if I let that dry, and what I don't want to do is sit and watch paint dry, that would be an absolute waste of our time. But if I let that dry, then I can work into that using other colours. And these layers that I put down shouldn't move too much, as long as I've got the right balance between water and pigment. So, as an example of that, this part now should be dry. Watercolour dries really quickly. So I'm going to get some of this turquoise colour, which is a bit lighter, and I'm going to add that in. And you can see that it touches that, but you can get that layering effect there. Sometimes you'll want a really seamless blend, and we can get that also, but this sense of layering and adding colour, can you see if I add that colour over to the dark blue, it makes the dark blue a little bit darker as well. That's going to give us some real tonal depth. So I'm just going to start adding this in as well. And I haven't got a lot of water there, but I've probably got more than I want, because I want this to be quite dark as well. And I'm going to put it over there, and you can see that I can go over that mark, and because I'm not going over it too much, which is also another common mistake, it holds its form, so it stays there. Two really common mistakes, I'm just going to demonstrate those to you, is rubbing over it and you lose all definition like that. So that line's gone now. And another one is continuing to do that, and especially with too much water, and then you start to pull the paper up. I've made that mistake there, but I'm not worried about it because I can correct it. All I need to do is let it dry. That's always the key with watercolour. Let it dry, we can correct it in a second. So I'm just going to continue ignoring that part there, and I'm going to start to add some of these tones into the eye. And again, you can see I'm building that texture. It's keeping my marks beneath for me because I'm being very, very considerate of my marks, and I'm using them sparingly. I'm not rubbing, I'm not going over and over areas, I'm just adding this real depth of texture in by making quite precise marks. Consider the way that my brush is going to move before I put it on the paper, and then I put it down, like so. And I wanted some of that darkest painter on there, so I'm going to put that down, like so. And I think I want some of this green up here too, like this, a little bit more watery. And you can see that that part where we made our mistake is now dried, so I can go back and correct that. I can't do, with watercolour, I can't do this a lot. I can't keep on going back and correcting, which is why I've got to consider my marks so much, because it compromises the quality of the paper. So I'm just going to put that line back in using a really dark mark there. And we'll keep on working with that just to get it right. Then I'm going to bring some green in. I want my tones to start getting lighter now, so I'm going to use a little bit more water. But I'm still going to make sure I've got a nice balance and I've got lots of control. So that's probably right for me. And that should have almost dried now, so I can put that in, and it's going to start working with that. But it's not going to get rid of any of that detail that we'd put in earlier. And we can start to build that texture with our marks like that. And if I want that mark to dull down a little, I'll just rub it like that. But you can see that there's real tonal depth here. I'm not getting a really watery outcome. I'm getting really nice, bold, vibrant colours. You can see all the texture and the marks. And that's going to work really well to give our outcome a real sense of depth and a real sense of realism. I'm going to return to my dark a little bit there because I want that a little bit darker. And there. And that's okay. It's okay that if you, once you've started using the light colours, you can return to the dark if that's what's necessary for your drawing, or your painting, should I say. But just in general, it's good to work from light to dark. I think I'm going to bring in some yellow here because this part's really light, and you can see there, because that wasn't fully dry, it just immersed a little bit, but that works for that area for me. And again, I made a little mistake there because it wasn't fully dry, but that's fine. Like, as you're learning, you will make mistakes, and we want to build on from those. But look at that, you get that overlap of one colour, two colour, three, and they start to create their own, so that you also get that layering effect, which is giving us the depth that we want. I'm just going to add to that. And this technique here that you can see what's happening, where the colour disperses, I'm just going to show you that, how we can utilise that. So that's because there's water on that area and it's a bit wet. So to get that, I'm going to put some water on here first, and I'm going to be quite generous with that. And everywhere that the water is, if I put paint in it, that's where it'll go. So if my edge is jagged like this, it'll go to that edge. And then I'm going to pick up some colour, and I'm going to make it really watery. And I've got to work quick here because I don't want the water to dry. And I'm just going to start to touch it in here, and you'll see that it starts to disperse like so, and it gives this really loose quality. And we can build that up so it blends into this area, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And there, I can just build these colours in so it starts to immerse with those. And that just gives this really fluid and translucent effect, which is one of the really lovely qualities about watercolour that you can utilise. But we don't want everything to be translucent, because then we'll lack that depth. And some artists would then, you can blow it to give it even more of a natural feel, and then I'll probably think, okay, I want some of that balance on the bottom as well, so I'll get some water in here and I'll bring those colours down here, so I've got some nice balance. And I'll just really water that up, make sure it's nice and watery on my page. Just get a little bit of pigment, and I'm just pressing it. I'm letting it really move freely. I'm not controlling it too much, because I controlled the water that I put down. I know where that is, I know where that's going to go, like this. And then again, I can get some of those colours back in with it. Be careful, because if I start moving this too much now, I'm going to get a yaki brown colour between the purple and the green. And then again, I'm just gonna blow it so that I get that really nice loose effect. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a base down for my eyebrow, similarly to how we have done previously. And I think I might use the purple to do that actually. I'm just going to put that down. And you can use a different tone if you want. I put some green in. Remember, I'm going to use little fine lines to go over this to make marks. And that brings us on to our next misconception, which is that you can't get really fine controlled marks with watercolour because it just runs everywhere. But that's not true, as long as the base that you're working on is dry. So now I can start to bring in my black, and I'm going to use some nice controlled marks like this to layer over this area and leave that reflection white, because this area should be dry. And I can get nice controlled marks in like this, and you'd probably want to use a smaller brush for this so that you can spread that out and you can use the width of the brush to get that in there. But this, going over this now with a bit of black, is just going to intensify that depth even more. Like so. Just really get it. And this bit where I made a mistake, you can see it's very obvious that I made a mistake, but I'm not labouring over it. I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to accept that that's a part of the painting that I've done today, and I'm going to recognise how I can improve on that next time. And then just switch to a smaller brush to get the really fine details of the eyebrows in. Brush, and I'm just going to have the eyebrows curve from the inside out like this, and I'm just using the tip of my brush. I'm not pressing down too hard, just really nice and basic here, just those basic eyelashes. I'm going to come in at the bottom here, and it's still a little bit wet here, so I might be wrong yet. I'm not going to do that yet, because can you see I'm not going to be able to get that precision of mark. But I think I will be able to get it to the extent that I need it on the eyebrows. So I'm going to go to there. I got to be really careful with my hand not to press and smudge underneath, but I'm just going to start making those marks, following the eyebrow round, getting the density of line in where it's necessary, which is in this area here on this particular image, and then loosening that up towards the end here. So the hairs are finer, they're less dense, and then just working that back in. A good balance of water and pigment would be, especially if you want the dark areas, that your brush still runs quite smoothly, but that your colour is nice and bold. If your brush starts to become like feathered like that, then that means you just need a little dip of water to get that smooth run back, and then you can just work like so. And maybe I can come back down here now. Yeah, I think so. Thicken these eyelashes up a little bit, get a little bit more definition in here, and then we've got some little eyelashes coming down there. Like so. Oh, those marks are a little bit thicker than I'd like, but that's fine for now. And then again, it's just a constant process of evaluation. I want that a bit darker, and I can use my water to pull a bit of that darkness out and spread it down over here, so that that's a little bit better. And you can just constantly work over it, as long as you're not rubbing the paper too much, as long as you're not labouring over very specific marks, so that we can get some nice depth and detail in there. Just to recap then, watercolour. It's important that you balance the water and the pigment. Too much water will make it really hard to control, and it'll also mean that you don't get a lot of tone or variation in your image, and not enough water will mean that it all ends up dark. We start with the darkest colours first, so that we can get a sense of layering and depth in there, and then as they dry we start to overlap, being very careful not to overwork and being very considerate of the amount of brush strokes that we make and the type of brush strokes that we make.